The scent of routine. The scent of routine was a comforting balm to Mr. Arthur Harrison. His office, a sanctuary of academic aspirations and collegiate dreams, hummed with the quiet industry of a well-oiled machine. He carefully straightened the stack of university brochures on the corner of his oak desk, aligning their glossy spines with a meticulous precision born of years. His fingers, slightly gnarled with age, smoothed a straight corner of a future scholar's pamphlet before he pushed his spectacles higher on his nose. The familiar weight of the frames was a small, reassuring presence. He glanced around the room, a gentle smile playing on his lips. The framed diplomas on the wall, the overflowing bookshelves groaning under the weight of college catalogs, the worn leather of his visitors' chairs, each element was a testament to a life dedicated to guiding young minds. For 32 years, this had been his domain, a place where anxieties were assuaged, and pathways to success illuminated. He'd witnessed generations of students, from the timid freshmen with uncertain gazes to the confident seniors ready to conquer the world, pass through this very door. Each one carried a unique story, a singular ambition, and he, Arthur Harrison, had been privileged to play a small part in their unfolding narratives. He picked up a well-used fountain pen, its brass gleam softened by years of handling, and made a final entry in his planner for the morning's tasks. A brief moment of calm before the daily symphony of schedules, applications, and existential student dread began anew. He thrived on it, on the predictable rhythm of his days, the satisfaction of helping sculpt futures. There was a quiet heroism in it, he sometimes thought, a subtle yet profound impact on the trajectory of lives. Just as he was about to lean back, a short, sharp buzz cut through the office's tranquil air. Brenda Lee, his formidable administrative assistant, a woman whose intuition was as sharp as her wit, was announcing an arrival. He reached for the intercom, a small, black box nestled beside his desk lamp. "Yes, Brenda?" His voice was a soft rumble, seasoned with patience. "Sarah Jenkins is here, Mr. Harrison," Brenda's voice crackled, devoid of unnecessary pleasantries. "Right on time, as always. Shall I send her in?" A faint, almost imperceptible tremor went through him. Sarah Jenkins. He'd seen her name on his schedule, of course. She was a bright student, academically gifted, but there was an unusual undercurrent to her appointments lately. A shift in her demeanor, a subtle change in the way she held herself, a new intensity in her eyes that he hadn't quite been able to pinpoint. It was a familiar feeling for him, this vague sense of anticipation that preceded a conversation that would require more than just academic advisement. He had a knack for sensing when a student needed more than just a college major laid out before them. Sometimes, they needed a confidant, a steady hand to navigate the more intricate labyrinth of growing up. He cleared his throat. "Yes, Brenda. Please do." He placed the pen back in its stand, his gaze drifting to the empty chair opposite his desk. The leather, smooth and uncreased, waited. He adjusted the knot of his tie, a small, unconscious gesture of preparation. The scent of routine, once so comforting, now had a faint, almost imperceptible note of something new, something unexpected, woven into its familiar fabric. He wondered what Sarah Jenkins would bring with her today, beyond her well-organized folder and her customary punctuality. 18 and growing. The office smelled of coffee and old paper as Mr. Harrison, a man whose glasses seemed permanently perched on his nose, adjusted them once more. Sunlight, filtered through the slightly grimy window, highlighted dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah, a folder clutched in her hand, had a new spring in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there just months ago. She took the seat opposite his desk, not slumping, but sitting erect, poised. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice clear and resonant. "I've narrowed down my college applications to 3, Georgetown, NYU, and UCLA. I've submitted all the early decision forms and essays. I wanted to discuss my final choices for my electives, just to make sure I'm still on the right track for a journalism major." She laid the folder on his desk, its contents neatly organized. Mr. Harrison picked up the folder, his fingers tracing the edges of her transcripts. "Excellent choices, Sarah. All highly reputable institutions with strong communications programs. Your grades are exceptional, as always, and your extracurricular involvement speaks volumes. For your electives, I'd suggest perhaps an advanced literature course, or perhaps even a philosophy introduction. Both would hone your critical thinking and analytical writing skills, essential for any journalist. He offered a gentle smile, his gaze warm and encouraging. His advice was, as always, meticulously considered and genuinely helpful. Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. That makes sense. I was leaning towards the philosophy elective, actually. I think it would be fascinating to delve into different schools of thought, to understand underlying motivations. She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her features. It feels different now, you know? Like everything is more significant. Mr. Harrison observed her, noting the subtle shift in her posture, the way she met his gaze without flinching. Different how, Sarah? He inquired, his tone patient. Well, she started, a hint of a playful smile touching her lips, I turned 18 last month. It just feels like an adult now. Not just in a legal sense, but in my head. I'm making real choices that will shape my entire life. It's exciting, and a little daunting, but mostly exciting. She gestured vaguely with her hand. It's like I've shed some old skin. I'm not just a student anymore. I'm a person with a future, and that future is right around the corner. Mr. Harrison set down her folder. He sensed a deeper current beneath her words, a subtle change in the air between them. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt a shift in their dynamic. He picked up his pen, twirling it idly between his fingers. That's a perfectly natural feeling, Sarah. 18 is a significant milestone. It's when many begin to truly forge their own paths. It's commendable that you're approaching it with such maturity and foresight. He offered another smile, a familiar, reassuring gesture. He hoped his slight discomfort wasn't showing. Sarah closed her folder but didn't move from the chair. Instead, she leaned in closer. You've given me a lot of good advice, she said softly. But now that I'm 18, maybe you could advise me on more than just classes. His pen froze mid-note. He wasn't related to her, just her advisor, but the look in her eyes filled the room with flirty tension he hadn't expected. A different kind of advice. The office smelled of coffee and old paper as the 59-year-old counselor adjusted his glasses. Sarah closed her folder but didn't move from the chair. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the blinds, cast long, striped shadows across the worn carpet. Mr. Harrison, his attention already drifting towards the stack of overdue reports on his desk, gave a polite nod. Anytime, Sarah. You know my door is always open for academic guidance. He gestured vaguely to the framed diplomas behind him, a silent testament to his professional domain. Sarah, however, didn't respond with her usual effusive thank you and departure. Instead, a peculiar glint entered her eyes. She leaned in closer, a subtle shift in her posture that brought her just a little too near his personal space. Her voice dropped, a soft murmur that barely cut through the hum of the fluorescent lights. You've given me a lot of good advice, Mr. Harrison, she began, her gaze unwavering, almost hypnotic. Truly, about my college applications, the scholarship essays, you're very good at it. Mr. Harrison felt a prickle of unease. He wasn't unaccustomed to compliments, but Sarah's tone held an unfamiliar weight, a subtle deviation from their usual academic exchanges. He offered a slightly strained smile, his fingers hovering over his pen. I'm glad I could help, Sarah. That's what I'm here for. He hoped she would take the cue and stand. The day had been long, and he still had emails to answer. But Sarah remained fixed in her seat. She glanced down at her hands, then slowly met his eyes again, a faint, almost mischievous smile playing on her lips. But now that I'm 18, she continued, her voice even softer, a silken whisper that seemed to absorb the ambient sounds of the office. And I'm facing, well, a lot of things outside of textbooks and lecture halls. Maybe you could advise me on more than just classes. Mr. Harrison's pen froze mid-note, a droplet of black ink suspended precariously on its tip. The air in the small office seemed to thicken, suddenly charged with an unspoken current. His mind, usually a well-ordered filing cabinet of policies and procedures, stumbled. What exactly did she mean by more than just classes? His gaze darted to her face, searching for a clearer explanation, but her expression remained enigmatic, a blend of earnestness and something else he couldn't quite decipher. He wasn't related to her, just her advisor, but the look in her eyes, combined with the intimate quality of her voice, filled the room with a flirty tension he hadn't expected. A faint blush began to creep up his neck. He cleared his throat, the sound rougher than he intended. "Sarah, I'm not sure I follow," he stammered, his professional composure starting to fray at the edges. His mind, usually so adept at navigating the nuances of student concerns, felt suddenly clumsy, as if trying to grasp smoke. The innocent aroma of coffee now seemed to carry a different, more unsettling note. He pushed his glasses further up his nose, a nervous habit, and waited, a knot tightening in his stomach, for her next words. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken possibilities, and Mr. Harrison found himself unexpectedly, uncomfortably, on the defensive. Frozen pen. The office smelled of coffee and old paper as the 59-year-old counselor adjusted his glasses. Sarah closed her folder but didn't move from the chair. Instead, she leaned in closer. "You've given me a lot of good advice," she said softly. "But now that I'm 18, maybe you could advise me on more than just classes." His pen froze mid-note. He wasn't related to her, just her advisor, but the look in her eyes filled the room with flirty tension he hadn't expected. Mr. Harrison's hand, which had been meticulously jotting down the merits of advanced calculus, seemed to develop a sudden rigor mortis. The tip of his ballpoint hovered over the crisp white page, a solitary bead of ink threatening to blot the pristine surface. He felt a peculiar heat rising in his cheeks, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his university days, debating existential philosophy with a particularly captivating literature student. The air in his small, usually predictable office thickened, taking on a strange, almost electric quality. The familiar scent of old textbooks and his own Earl Grey tea was suddenly overlaid by something indefinable, something youthful and audacious. He glanced at Sarah, who was still leaning forward, her posture relaxed but her gaze direct, a slight, knowing smile playing on her lips. Her eyes, usually sparkling with academic ambition, now held a different, more challenging glint. He cleared his throat, a sound that felt unexpectedly loud in the sudden quiet. The movement was meant to be casual, a professional reset, but it came out a little too forced, a bit raspy. He pushed his glasses further up his nose, a nervous habit, though he wasn't quite sure what he was nervous about. It was just Sarah, a student he'd known since she was a shy freshman. "Sarah," he began, his voice attempting a steady, reassuring tone, though he suspected a faint tremor betrayed him. He carefully placed the pen down on the desk blotter, aligning it perfectly parallel with the edge of his notepad. It was a small, deliberate action, an attempt to regain control of the moment, to re-establish the familiar boundaries of their interaction. I appreciate your confidence in my advice." He paused, searching for the right words that would gently, firmly, steer the conversation back to safe, academic shores. He met her gaze, trying to project an air of calm, professional authority, but he could feel the ghost of that unexpected tension still lingering in the space between them. However, he continued, emphasizing the word, "My role here at the school is strictly as your academic and career advisor. My advice, as valuable as I hope it has been, is confined to those areas." He gestured vaguely around the office, at the shelves filled with college brochures and career guides, trying to invoke the spirit of their professional setting. "I am here to help you navigate your educational path, nothing more, nothing less." Sarah's smile didn't falter, but a subtle shift in her expression indicated she understood his unspoken message. Her gaze, though still warm, now held a hint of playful defiance, as if she were acknowledging his boundary while simultaneously wondering how long it would hold. The air, though no longer charged with the same intensity, still felt different, as if a window had briefly been opened to a new, unsettling breeze. Mr. Harrison picked up his pen again, but the notes on advanced calculus suddenly seemed very distant, very frozen. Twinkling eyes. The silence that followed Sarah's unexpected suggestion was thick, punctuated only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Mr. Harrison, his pen still suspended over a half-formed note, felt a blush creep up his neck. He cleared his throat, a nervous habit he thought he'd long since conquered. "Sarah," he began, his voice a little huskier than he intended, "my role here at Northwood High is strictly that of an academic and career counselor. My advice, as you rightly observed, pertains to your studies, your future education, and your professional trajectory." He paused, trying to meet her gaze with a professional firmness that felt entirely artificial under the circumstances. Sarah, however, didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a mischievous grin, nor was it openly flirtatious. It was something far more subtle, a quiet amusement that only deepened Mr. Harrison's disquiet. Her eyes, those same eyes that had sparked his initial confusion, now seemed to dance with an unreadable light. He couldn't quite place the emotion behind it. Was it a challenge? An invitation? Or simply a young woman enjoying the awkwardness she'd created? He felt a sudden need to reassert control, to bring the ship back to its intended course before it veered too far off into uncharted waters. "Now, about these applications," he continued, his voice regaining some of its usual even tone, though a faint tremor lingered beneath the surface. He gestured towards the thick folder on his desk, its contents a safe harbor of standardized tests and carefully crafted essays. "We need to finalize the early decision forms for Westerfield. Their engineering program is highly competitive, and your GPA, while excellent, needs to be buttressed by a compelling personal statement." Sarah's smile softened, though it didn't entirely vanish. She leaned back slightly in her chair, a graceful movement that made the worn fabric creak faintly. "Right," she said, her voice now devoid of the earlier suggestive tone, though a certain lilt remained. "Westerfield. I've been working on that personal statement. I was thinking of focusing on the robotics club, specifically the design challenges we faced with the autonomous navigation system." Mr. Harrison picked up his pen again, relief washing over him in a gentle wave. This was familiar territory, safe and predictable. "Excellent. That demonstrates problem-solving skills and teamwork. Have you considered weaving in your volunteer work at the Science Museum? It shows a dedication to fostering scientific curiosity in others." As they delved deeper into the intricacies of college applications, discussing SAT scores and extracurricular activities, Sarah maintained a perfectly academic demeanor. She answered his questions thoughtfully, offered insightful suggestions for her essays, and even took notes when he outlined the upcoming deadlines. Yet, despite her seemingly professional engagement, Mr. Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that something else was still simmering beneath the surface. Every so often, when she looked up from her notebook to meet his gaze, her eyes would catch the light just so, and he swore he could see that familiar twinkle return. It was a fleeting glint, a ghost of her earlier intent, a quiet reminder that while the conversation had returned to the expected channels, the undercurrent of her original proposition still lingered, like a faint, sweet scent in the air. He found himself wondering, more than once, if her renewed focus was genuine, or merely a clever redirection of her own, a subtle concession made with a hidden agenda. Aftershocks in the office. The customary comfort of stale coffee now seemed to drape the air in Arthur Harrison's office like a suffocating shroud. His sanctuary of order and quiet reflection had become an arena of strange disquiet. Sunk in his familiar leather chair, recently vacated by Sarah, the room's silence magnified the unsettling thrum beneath his ribs. He idly traced the smooth, cool grain of his desk, a tactile habit usually signaling deep thought, but now a desperate search for an anchor. A frown creased his brow, he nudged his glasses higher, though his vision remained perfectly sharp. Sarah's image, leaning forward, eyes alight with an unreadable gleam, replayed like a skipping film. "Perhaps you could advise me on more than just classes." The words, innocuous in isolation, had carried a subtle inflection that sent an unexpected frisson down his spine. Had he misconstrued her meaning? Was his unease an overreaction? His reply, a clumsy dismissal cloaked in professional formality, felt particularly inept in retrospect. He'd attempted to reroute the discussion towards academics, the safe harbor of course schedules and career trajectories, yet the lingering warmth of her presence suggested his efforts to douse those embers had largely failed. A knot tightened in his gut. Arthur prided himself on his gentle guidance, his open ear for students. He saw himself as a counselor, a mentor, not whatever that moment had felt like. He replayed his own syllables, scrutinizing each for an inadvertent invitation, any unintended encouragement. Had his genuine concern for her future been mistaken for something more intimate? He sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. It was an occupational hazard, this blurring of professional lines, the vulnerability of young minds seeking direction. But with Sarah, it felt distinct. More pointed. He was still entangled in this internal debate when the office door creaked open. Brenda Lee, his administrative assistant, poked her head inside, her usually cheerful face now etched with a subtle curiosity. She clutched a stack of fresh schedules. "Everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" Her voice, a low rumble, accompanied a keen sweep of the room, her gaze resting briefly on his slumped posture and troubled brow. Arthur straightened, attempting a casual air that felt utterly artificial. "Yes, Brenda, perfectly. Just contemplating the existential complexities of student registration." He offered a weak smile, hoping it would conceal the tempest within. Brenda's eyes, unwavering for another beat, held a knowing glint that bespoke her skepticism. She was a woman who could decipher a mood faster than its owner could articulate it. She knew his tells, his routines. This current disarray wasn't part of his usual contemplation. "Right," she said dryly. She crossed to his desk, depositing the schedules precisely in the designated inbox. "Well, let me know if those existential complexities require a strong cup of tea, or perhaps a firmer hand with the printer." Her lips quirked upward, a hint of amusement playing at the corners. She paused, her gaze flicking to the empty chair where Sarah had sat. Then, with a quiet hum, she turned and left, leaving Arthur once more to the unsettling quiet and the echoes of a conversation he simply couldn't shake. The aftershocks, he suspected, were only just beginning. A bright wave. The scent of his usual Earl Grey, a comfort in its routine, felt strangely muted this morning. Arthur Harrison stirred his mug, the ceramic clinking softly against the spoon, a rhythm usually soothing but now merely an accompaniment to his restless thoughts. He'd woken with the same persistent knot in his stomach, a low thrum of unease that had settled in after Sarah's unexpected comment yesterday. He usually savored these quiet pre-work moments, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the first tentative rays of sun through the kitchen window, but today, the peace felt thin, easily fractured by the echo of her voice, the memory of her intense gaze. He tried to focus on the day's schedule, mentally ticking off appointments, but his mind kept circling back to the image of her leaning forward, her eyes sparkling with an unusual glint. He finished his tea, the warmth doing little to thaw the lingering chill of awkwardness. After a quick shower and dressing in his usual tweed jacket, a familiar armor against the unpredictable world, he grabbed his briefcase. The walk to his office was a blur of familiar sights, the dew-kissed grass, the chirping sparrows, all registered peripherally as his internal monologue replayed the conversation. He wished he'd handled it differently, wished he'd had a more immediate, less flustered response. He prided himself on his composure, his ability to navigate delicate situations, yet with Sarah, he felt off balance. He entered the school building, the familiar scent of floor wax and adolescent energy filling his nostrils. The main hallway, usually a bustling thoroughfare, was still relatively quiet at this early hour, a few students drifting towards their lockers, murmuring in low tones. Arthur was heading towards the staff room for a quick glance at the morning announcements when he saw her. Sarah Jenkins was at her locker, an explosion of colorful stickers and band posters adorning the inside of the door. She was rummaging through a backpack, her bright red hair a vivid splash against the muted tones of the hallway. As he passed, her head popped up, a smile instantly blooming on her face. Her eyes, the same piercing blue that had held him captive yesterday, met his. Without a moment's hesitation, she lifted a hand and waved, a wide, open, utterly unburdened wave, as if greeting an old friend she was genuinely pleased to see. "Morning, Mr. Harrison," she called out, her voice clear and cheerful, devoid of any trace of the loaded subtext he'd been replaying. The simple, unself-conscious gesture hit him with the force of a small, bright wave breaking on a calm shore. It was just a wave, a friendly greeting, nothing more. The knot in his stomach loosened, a fraction, but a significant fraction nonetheless. Her smile was genuine, untainted by the flirtatious tension he had imagined. In that brief, sunlit moment, the heavy cloak of his anxieties seemed to lift, revealing the ordinary, pleasant interaction it likely was. Perhaps he had overthought it, he mused, a small, tentative sigh of relief escaping him. Perhaps it was just Sarah being Sarah, confident, curious, and just a little bit impulsive, entirely unaware of the ripples her words had created in his own mind. He managed a small, genuine smile in return, a silent acknowledgement of her bright, uncomplicated greeting. The morning suddenly felt a little lighter, the air a little clearer. Just saying hello. The chime of the bell still echoed faintly in the hallway when a light tap sounded on his open office door. Mr. Harrison looked up from a stack of overdue permission slips to see Sarah Jenkins, a bright, almost playful glint in her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. She wasn't carrying books or a backpack, just her phone in one hand. "Mr. Harrison," she began, a smile playing on her lips, "just saying hello. I have a free period, and I was in the neighborhood." Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the framed diplomas and the perpetually half-empty coffee mug on his desk. He pushed his glasses higher on his nose, a slight flush rising to his cheeks. "Sarah. Come in. Everything all right?" The memory of their last conversation, and the lingering ambiguity of her final statement, was still a fresh wound in his mind. He gestured to the vacant chair opposite his desk, the same one she'd occupied just days prior. She shrugged, pushing off the doorframe and drifting into the office, but didn't sit. Instead, she moved towards the small bookshelf near the window, her fingers tracing the spines of well-worn textbooks. "Oh, everything's fine. I just remembered about the upcoming charity drive. Are you still thinking of judging the bake-off?" Mr. Harrison blinked, momentarily thrown by the abrupt shift in topic. "The bake-off? Yes, I suppose I am. Mrs. Albright asked me weeks ago." He watched her, a curious blend of caution and interest stirring within him. Her demeanor was so effortlessly casual, so utterly devoid of the intensity that had saturated their last encounter. It was almost as if that conversation had never happened. "You should totally do it," she enthused, turning back to face him, her eyes sparkling. "Last year, Emily Henderson's lemon bars were legendary. But I heard Michael's mom makes a killer chocolate lava cake. It's going to be a tough competition." She wasn't seeking advice, she was just sharing, her voice light and unburdened. He found himself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. "I imagine it will be. I'm hoping to sample some of the entries before making any final decisions." He leaned back in his chair, observing her. The sunlight filtering through the window illuminated the faint gold highlights in her hair. She seemed so young, so full of an uncomplicated zest for life, as she chattered about the school's various happenings. There was no hint of flirtation in her tone now, no lingering undertone of something deeper. Just genuine, youthful friendliness. "You know," she continued, her attention now caught by a framed photograph on his desk, a slightly faded picture of him with a younger, more vibrant group of students from years past. "It's weird to think how much effort goes into these things, and then it's all over in a day. Like, all that baking, all that planning, just for one afternoon." She picked up the photo, studying it with a thoughtful frown. "That's often how life works, Sarah," he replied, his voice softer than before. "The journey is often as important, if not more important, than the destination." He felt a sense of relief wash over him, a quiet understanding settling into place. Her visit, devoid of any hidden agenda, had clarified things more effectively than any direct question could have. She was simply being Sarah, curious, charming, and a little impulsive. And sometimes, a friendly hello was just that. She placed the photo back down carefully. "Yeah, I guess so." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "Well, I should probably go." Don't want to miss my next class. She offered him another bright smile, a simple, uncomplicated gesture. See you around, Mr. Harrison. And with that, she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of something sweet, perhaps her perfume, or just the lingering memory of her youthful energy. Mr. Harrison took a deep breath, the subtle aroma of old paper and coffee reasserting itself. The office felt quieter now, but also, surprisingly, lighter. The counselor's peace. The scent of brewing chamomile tea, a stark contrast to the usual coffee and old paper, wafted from the small mug on Mr. Harrison's desk. The afternoon sun, filtered through the Venetian blinds, striped his worn carpet. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking a familiar rhythm, and steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on a small, framed photo of a tranquil mountain lake. Sarah's words from the previous day still echoed, not with the sharp edge of a siren's call, but with a surprising gentleness, like a forgotten melody. He replayed their last few sessions, not just the spoken words, but the subtle shifts in her posture, the glint in her eyes, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head. He recalled the way she'd lingered, the questions that veered slightly off topic, the quick, bright smiles that seemed to bloom just for him. His initial bewilderment, the faint blush that had crept up his neck, now seemed almost comical. He had, he realized, been a bit of a theatrical fool, projecting adult complexities onto what was likely simpler, more innocent behavior. He remembered his own youth, the clumsy attempts at connection, the testing of boundaries with authority figures, the nascent understanding of one's own appeal. Sarah was 18, a threshold age, a moment of burgeoning self-awareness and a playful exploration of how one interacts with the world. It wasn't a calculated seduction, he now saw with startling clarity, but a youthful, perhaps slightly awkward, attempt at engaging, at being seen, at understanding her own burgeoning power. She was like a kitten batting at a string, not intending to ensnare, but simply to play. The idea brought a soft smile to his lips, chasing away the last vestiges of his earlier unease. He pictured her vibrant energy, the way she would bounce into his office, a whirlwind of ideas and anxieties. She sought guidance, yes, but also connection. It was a natural part of her development, a testament to her outgoing nature. He had, perhaps, been too quick to interpret her friendliness through the lens of his own adult experience, forgetting the innocent curiosity that often drives young people. He had complicated what was, in essence, an uncomplicated desire for interaction and attention, a natural part of her journey into adulthood. A profound sense of peace settled over him, warm and comforting like the tea beside him. The knot that had tightened in his stomach over the past few days unraveled, leaving a pleasant lightness. His role was clear, unblemished. He was a counselor, a guide, a steady presence for young minds navigating the often turbulent waters of adolescence. His commitment to providing a safe, supportive space for students, free from personal entanglements, felt stronger than ever. He picked up his pen, its familiar weight of comfort in his hand. The blank page of his notepad seemed to welcome him, ready for the next set of thoughts, the next student's concerns. Sarah would be back next week, undoubtedly with new questions about college applications or career paths. He would be ready, a calm anchor in her evolving world, his mind clear, his purpose reaffirmed. The office, usually just a workplace, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could truly make a difference, one thoughtful conversation at a time. He was, and would remain, simply Mr. Harrison, the counselor. And in that realization, he found his true peace.